You're sitting at home, scrolling on your phone, arguing with strangers in the comments section about politics that won't matter in 6 months. Then you hear it before you see it. Distant engines shouting, the sound of too many feet on asphalt. You walk outside, and the highway next to your town isn't traffic anymore. It's a river of human beings. Let me ask you something. When that happens, are you a spectator, a target, or invisible? Because once a few million desperate people start moving, the map changes, and your house might suddenly be on the new main road. The question is not if it happens, it's what's your position when it does. We're talking about the refugee wave. War, economic collapse, failed states, climate disasters, all pushing people out of their homes and straight through your living room zip code. This is not Hollywood zombies or Mad Max cosplay. This is mothers with kids, exhausted men, old people who can't walk another mile, and mixed into that, predators and opportunists. You don't control who shows up, you only control how exposed you are when they do. Here's what I know with absolute certainty. When millions move, 99% of people in the path will improvise, panic, or freeze. The other 1% will have already mapped the flow, chosen their position, and set rules for how they interact or don't interact with that moving human storm. Today, I'm going to drag you into that 1%. You can keep scrolling and hope your town never shows up on the news ticker, or you can spend the next few minutes building an actual playbook for mass migration and population displacement. Forget the fantasy where everyone politely lines up at the stadium and waits for bottled water. In real life, the system gets overwhelmed in hours, not days. Before we get tactical, do the smart thing. Join the minority that actually thinks ahead. If you want to be part of the tiny percentage that doesn't get crushed by the wave, hit subscribe, drop a comment with your worst-case scenario, and then come back. Because once we start, you're not going to see your neighborhood the same way again. First, you need to understand what a refugee wave actually looks like, not the sanitized version. It doesn't show up as a single neat line of people with matching backpacks. It's chaotic, layered, and it comes in phases. Phase 1 is the trickle. Rumors of instability, a few families moving, maybe some extra traffic on the road, a couple of news stories from over there. This is when amateurs shrug and experts quietly start changing their posture, topping off fuel, checking routes, updating go bags. If you wait until the trickle becomes a flood, you're already late. Phase 2 is the flow. Buses overloaded, cars packed beyond capacity, trains standing room only, and the roads start to clog. You see abandoned vehicles, overheated engines, people walking along the shoulder. This is your last easy decision point to either relocate temporarily or lock down your position before you're surrounded by people who have burned through their options. Phase 3 is the surge. The system snaps. Fuel's gone, government coordination breaks, official shelters overflow, and the movement goes fully on foot. Now you have columns of people stretching for miles, concentrated along the easiest paths, roads, rail lines, river valleys, any terrain that doesn't fight them. If your driveway touches one of those arteries, congratulations, you're in the path. Phase 4 is the tail. The wave doesn't just stop one day. You get stragglers, small groups, isolated families, and opportunistic predators working the edges. This is when exhausted, hungry, and desperate turns into dangerous in a much more targeted way. The wave passes, but the security problem lingers. Now, here's the part nobody talks about. People in motion are not the same as people at rest. A hungry crowd with nowhere to go has different psychology, different ethics, and different risk factors than your neighbors at the summer barbecue. Distance from home and uncertainty about the future rewires behavior. There's a thing called crowd density, measured in people per square meter. At 2 per square meter, it's uncomfortable. At 4 or 5, you're in no personal space, everyone shoving territory. At 6 or more, people can't move freely, and crush injuries become a real threat. Now imagine that density combined with hunger, fear, rumors, and bad actors stirring the pot. Your smart move is not to moralize about whether people should or shouldn't be moving. Your smart move is to predict where that movement will go and decide if you want to be near it, above it, or far away from it. Humans follow terrain, infrastructure, and information. If you know how to read those, you can almost see the lines before they happen. Let's talk geography because the map is your first weapon. Refugee waves follow the path of least resistance, valleys instead of ridges, roads instead of bushwhacking, bridges instead of river crossings, gaps in mountains instead of summits. Water, elevation, and infrastructure are the three gods of movement. Pull up a satellite map of your area and zoom out until you can see at least 100 miles in every direction. Trace the major highways, then overlay railways, then major rivers. Those are your primary corridors, your migration superhighways. If you live directly on one of these, you're in the splash zone. Next, mark the choke points: major bridges, tunnels, mountain passes, narrow canyons, border crossings, big interchanges. Anywhere the flow is forced to compress, you get density spikes, delays, and conflict. A town near a choke point doesn't just see people pass through, it becomes a pressure cooker. Then, mark the bypasses, secondary roads that parallel highways, old service roads, farm tracks, and river trails. These are where people go when the main routes clog. Refugees aren't stupid. When the obvious path turns into a nightmare, they peel off into any alternate that looks passable. That includes your quiet little rural back road. Finally, identify the dead zones, areas that are hard to cross or offer nothing. Steep terrain, swamps, dense forest with no easy trail, broken industrial zones, or simply empty land with no services. Most people avoid these. Some predators and highly motivated groups seek them out. You don't hide in a dead zone by accident. You choose it and prepare it. Once you've got your corridors, choke points, bypasses, and dead zones sketched, you ask the big question: where are you right now in relation to those lines? Are you sitting on a corridor next to a choke point, on a bypass, or tucked near a dead zone? Each one has different risks and opportunities. If you're on a corridor, your priority is timing and visibility. You will see movement. The only variable is when and how intense. You want early warning systems and a plan to either go dark or get out before the wave peaks. Staying lit up and obvious on a corridor is how you audition for unwilling supply depot. If you're near a choke point, your priority is distance. The closer you are to that constricted funnel, the more compression and chaos you'll see. A home half a mile from a major bridge is a very different risk profile than a home 5 miles back on a side road, even if both are near the river. Distance buys you breathing room. If you're on a bypass, your biggest threat is feeling safe until suddenly you're not. Bypasses often stay calm until the main routes clog, and then overnight they become the new main route. A quiet rural lane can transform into a refugee conveyor belt in 24 hours once someone drops a location pin. If you're near a dead zone or hard terrain, you might be in luck if you use it right. That rough ground can be your buffer, keeping most of the mass movement on the other side. But it also means if people end up there, they're more desperate, more committed, and more likely to be the ones you really don't want knocking on your door. Now let's talk about avoidance by design. The best strategy is always to not be where the problem is. If you're still choosing where to live or where to place a bug-out location, you should be thinking in terms of refugee shadow lines, zones that are naturally just off the easy path. Close enough to resources, far enough from main flow. A strong refugee-resilient location has a few traits. It's not directly adjacent to a major corridor, but has discrete access to it. It's shielded by terrain features, hills, forests, bends, and roads that block line of sight. And it has multiple low-profile ways in and out that don't all pass through the same obvious choke point. People move toward what they can see and what they've heard about. If your place is visually boring, off the main sightlines, and not tagged in 1,000 Instagram posts, you've already reduced your risk. This is why flashy, exposed hilltop mansions are security disasters and modest, semi-concealed properties win. Congratulations. Ugly and boring is tactical. Most people pick homes based on commute and curb appeal. You're going to pick based on flow and concealment. How many vehicles drive past each day? How many people can see your yard from the road? If a line of refugees walked past, would your place register as resource-rich target or just another building? You want to be forgettable, already stuck where you live. Then your game is mitigation. You might not be able to move your house off the corridor, but you can change what it looks like, how it sounds, and how it broadcasts your presence when thousands of eyes are scanning for opportunity. We'll get there. First, let's talk about seeing the wave before it hits. Early warning is your force multiplier. You don't need secret government intel. You need pattern recognition and a few cheap tools. In a world where everyone live streams everything, mass movement rarely happens in total silence. Social media, local news, scanners, and traffic cams can give you hours or days of advance notice if you're paying attention. Watch for signals. Sudden border closures, fuel shortages, major conflicts igniting, infrastructure failures, mass layoffs, or big evacuations. When you see governments ordering voluntary evacuations, understand that's polite language for leave before this becomes involuntary. Your trigger points should be earlier than the average person's, not later. Radio scanners and local emergency channels can tell you when authorities are overwhelmed. When you start hearing repeated calls about blocked roads, medical overload, and all available units, that's your red flag that pressure is building. If you combine that with reports of people on foot, your window to reposition is shrinking fast. Physical observation matters too. Don't live in your house like it's a submarine. Live like you're running a small reconnaissance post. Distant engine noise at odd hours, unusual foot traffic, lines at gas stations, crowded ATMs, these are all early indicators of compression in the system. The wave doesn't appear from nowhere, it builds. Now comes the ugly decision. Do you stay or do you move before the wave hits your street? Staying can make sense if your position is defensible and you're not directly on the main flow. Moving makes sense if you're in the corridor or at a choke point and have somewhere better to go. Doing nothing and hoping is the default that gets most people trapped. Here's the hard truth. Once the wave is fully formed and on foot, your vehicle stops being freedom and starts being a liability. A car is just a rolling snack bar and loot crate if you try to push it through a dense crowd. If your plan involves driving out through thousands of people who have burned through their options, you don't have a plan. You have a wish. If you're going to leave early and quietly. No big production, no telling everyone on social media, no convoy with 10 vehicles and rooftop cargo boxes. You move when the system is strained but not shattered, when roads still function, but everyone else is still arguing about whether things are really that bad. Early movers don't get trapped in the gap. If you're staying, you switch from normal homeowner to low visibility outpost. That means making your home look less occupied, less resource-rich, and less worth the risk. It's called vacuum protocol. You create the illusion that there's nothing of value here, no one home, nothing to gain by messing with this place. Predators and desperate people skip what looks empty if there are easier targets. Start with light and sound. Light at night is a beacon that screams, power and resources here. You need blackout capability, curtains, panels, whatever it takes so that from the outside, your house stays dark even if you're lit up inside. Sound carries farther when everything else is quiet. Loud music, generators, and arguments all travel. Quiet people get ignored. Next, visible resources. Outdoor freezers, stacks of firewood, water barrels, solar panels, visible generators, and well-tended gardens all advertise long-term sustainability. In normal times, they're smart investments. In a refugee wave, they're neon signs. You don't necessarily remove them, but you camouflage, de-emphasize, or fence them from direct line of sight. Vehicles tell a story too. A shiny, fully fueled truck parked out front says, "These people have assets." A dirty, older vehicle parked at an angle, maybe even with a flat spare appearance, says, "Not worth it." You can control what story your driveway tells. Hell, you can even make one vehicle look non-functional while the real escape vehicle stays hidden elsewhere. Perimeter posture matters. A fortress with visible guns, spotlights, and aggressive signage might work against a few looters, but against a wave it just advertises, "We have a lot worth protecting." You want subtle security, solid doors, reinforced frames, hidden cameras, motion detectors, and layered obstacles that don't scream military compound. Think hedges and layout, not razor wire and watchtowers. Inside, you plan for low-profile living. That means restricted light sources, pre-cooked or low-smell foods when crowds are near, and minimizing any obvious signs of activity that might catch attention from the road. Smoke from chimneys, strong cooking odors, and loud generators carry further when people are cold and hungry. You want to be a ghost until you choose otherwise. Now let's talk about the part you've been trying not to think about. Contact. Because no matter how invisible you try to be, there's a chance someone knocks, calls out, or outright shows up in your yard. And you need a protocol before that happens, not a debate while it's happening. First, decide who speaks for your household. No improvising with 6 different voices yelling over each other. One person handles all outside interaction. Everyone else stays in pre-assigned roles. The speaker maintains calm, consistent messaging. Limited resources, no extra space, already committed to helping others elsewhere, very little to offer. Compassion doesn't require you to advertise abundance. Second, create a buffer zone. If you ever give aid, you do it away from your main living area, away from your main stockpile, and ideally away from your primary entrance. That might be a small table at the edge of your property, a gate, or even a neutral spot you can access without revealing your home. The more distance between your resources and whoever approaches, the better. Third, understand that in a refugee wave, word of mouth is a force multiplier. If you hand out bags of food to 30 people right outside your house, you've just sent a beacon into the crowd. These people have plenty. You might feel good for 10 minutes. Tomorrow, you might not have a door left. Controlled, small-scale aid is possible, but it has to be deliberate and limited. This is where the moral weight hits. You're going to want to help more than you safely can. You're going to see people who don't deserve what's happening to them. But you either set limits ahead of time, or you'll set them in the moment under pressure. And that's when people make promises and sacrifices that get their own families hurt or killed. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're survival. One tactic: decide categories, not faces. Example: we will provide a small amount of water at the outer edge of the property during daylight hours until X supply runs out. Or, we will only offer aid to families with small children, and only in this specific way. The details are your call, but the point is to avoid case-by-case emotional decision-making when you're staring at suffering. Let's shift to movement. What if you have to travel through or alongside a refugee wave? Maybe you're trying to reach a safer location, a family member, or a supply point. Rule 1. Don't be the shiny object. A single vehicle piled with gear, visibly better off than everyone on foot, is a rolling target. Your goal is to be uninteresting. Travel light and look average. No flashy gear strapped to the outside, no brand new packs visible, no clearly high-end weapons on display. If you're on foot, you want to look like everyone else, maybe slightly worse. Competence should show in your movement and planning, not in visible luxury. Predators scan for the outliers who look worth the risk. Route selection is life or death. You have 3 broad choices: move with the main flow, shadow it at a distance, or detour as far as possible. Moving with the flow gives you cover in numbers, but also entangles you in its chaos. Shadowing at distance lets you track the wave without being fully in it. Wide detours reduce contact, but increase exposure to isolation and terrain problems. There is no zero-risk choice, only trade-offs. If you move with the flow, stay near the edges, not the dense center. Edges give you options to peel off, avoid crush points, and sidestep localized trouble. You still have to deal with resource competition and potential conflict, but you're not physically trapped if something goes bad up ahead. If you shadow the wave, use parallel routes, farm lanes, side roads, rail service tracks, tree lines. Your advantage is situational awareness, knowing where the main mass is so you don't accidentally run into its densest part. Your disadvantage is that you're more alone, so you can't melt into anonymity if someone takes an interest in you. Night travel is a double-edged blade. Under a refugee wave, nights can be quieter on main routes, but darkness also hides predators, obstacles, and desperate people willing to take more risks. If you move at night, keep light discipline absolute. Shielded lights, short bursts, no big lanterns announcing your position. And never assume you're the only one who thought, we'll move when everyone else sleeps. Let's circle back to resources, because this is where emotions blow up plans. You've got a finite amount of food, water, fuel, and medical supplies. The wave passing your front door might have 1,000 people on a single day. Simple math. If you hand out just a little to each, you will deplete your reserves in hours and still not meaningfully change their situation. You cannot feed a wave. Your first responsibility is to the people you've already committed to, your family, your group, your tribe. If you keep them alive and stable, you might be able to help others in a sustainable way later. If you collapse your core trying to save everyone who passes by, you end up adding yourself to the list of dependents. That doesn't help anyone for long. Set hard minimums, the amount of food and water that never gets touched for charity. Above that, Decide what percentage, if any, you're willing to allocate to emergency aid. When it's gone, it's gone. This isn't cruelty. It's math in a world where feelings don't refill water jugs. Write those limits down now, not in the middle of crying faces at your fence. Security isn't just hardware. It's information control. In a refugee wave, rumors amplify like crazy. House on the Hill is giving out food becomes House on the Hill has tons of supplies becomes House on the Hill is hoarding from us. You want to be on as few lips as possible. That means minimal visible generosity and no bragging to neighbors about how prepared you are. Coordinate with neighbors quietly if you can. A street that has a shared understanding of we stay low, we don't advertise, we support each other if there's trouble is harder to pick apart than a collection of panicked individuals. But choose carefully who you trust. The guy who posts every thought on social media is a liability, not an asset. Defensive planning in a refugee wave is about deterrence and delay, not Hollywood firefights. You're not holding off an army. You're discouraging opportunists and slowing down any determined threats long enough to escape or make them give up. Solid locks, reinforced doors, limited entry points, and clear fields of view beat fantasy fortifications that you can't actually man 24/7. If you're armed, remember this. Every weapon you show becomes something someone might try to take. Brandishing rifles in front of thousands of desperate people is not a flex. It's an invitation to escalation. Concealed capability is superior to obvious threat displays. You want people to underestimate you, not view you as a prize. Now, the darkest part, there will be criminals embedded in the flow. Not everyone in the wave is innocent, and not everyone is dangerous, but the mix is real. Some will pretend to be vulnerable to get access. Others will wait until night and target the households that broadcast weakness or wealth. Your security posture has to assume both compassion and caution coexist. Screening who gets near your home is not profiling by appearance, it's recognizing behavior. People who respect boundaries, accept no, and move on are one thing. People who test gates, linger, argue, or keep coming back after an answer are another. Patterns tell you more than clothing or accents ever will. Pay attention to patterns. If the wave passes and your place remains intact, your job isn't over. The aftermath brings its own problems. Those who got left behind, small predatory groups, and those trying to regroup. Infrastructure might be damaged, regular supply chains broken, and law enforcement stretched thin or absent. You prepared to ride out the wave, now you prepare to rebuild quietly while everyone else is still stunned. Emotionally, none of this is clean. You're going to question your choices. You're going to replay the faces you turned away. That doesn't make you a monster. It makes you human in a system that failed long before people started walking past your mailbox. Remember, you didn't cause the wave, you just chose not to drown in it. So what do you do right now, while the internet still works and no one is marching past your place? First, map your world like a tactician. Print or download offline maps, mark corridors, choke points, bypasses, and dead zones within at least 100 miles. Your home isn't just an address, it's a coordinate on a movement grid. Second, decide your trigger points. What combination of news, local signals, and physical signs will cause you to change posture, to leave, or to lock down? Write them down and talk them through with your people. If you wait until it feels bad enough, you'll always be a day late. Pre-made decisions beat panicked debates. Third, design your vacuum protocol. How will you make your home visually less interesting? What lights need blacking out? What resources are visible and can be camouflaged? How will you control noise? Spend a weekend making your place look like the kind of house you wouldn't bother with if you were tired and hungry. Fourth, have the uncomfortable conversation about aid limits. Decide who you help, how, where, and how much. Put it in writing. It's better to fight with your conscience now on paper than to collapse your boundaries later when someone is crying on your doorstep. Compassion without structure is how people burn out and break. Finally, make peace with the fact that there are no perfect answers here, just better odds. You can choose to ignore all of this and hope the wave never hits your town, or you can choose to look the ugly reality in the eye and quietly stack the deck in your favor. One of those paths leaves you at the mercy of millions, the other gives you agency when the world starts moving. Your move. Subscribe if you're part of the 0.1% who would rather think now than bleed later. Then open a map in a new tab and start tracing the lines that might one day decide whether you watch the wave go by or get crushed under it. Class dismissed.